Great.
It's my great pleasure to welcome to VC++ 2020 Hilla Ovil-Brenner. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Hilla Ovil-Brenner, and I'm a managing director at Techstars Tel Aviv, and also an investor and a mentor for many startups, but also the founder of a nonprofit organization called Yazamiyot, which is the largest female founders organization in Israel with over 5,000 members. And also a mother of 3 and a wife and everything else. So thanks very much for having me here.
Thank you. Let's start with talking a little bit about Techstars and what Techstars does. So Techstars Tel Aviv, what are the programs you do?
Yeah, so Techstars actually is a great love of mine. I joined Techstars about 2.5 years ago. And I realized that everything that I felt about entrepreneurship is really in this vehicle of Techstars. There's over 60 programs around the world, and we're the biggest seed investor today. We've invested in over 3,000 startups, and our portfolio is close to $30 billion. So really, really big companies like SendGrid and DigitalOcean and even Uber in some way came out of Techstars. And I run the Techstars Tel Aviv City Accelerator, which is super exciting because I have so much to bring to this network. So the idea behind Techstars is really to help entrepreneurs succeed and create a network for them of mentors and investors and fellow founders and alumni that can really help them and bond and create international opportunities for them.
So those are staggeringly big numbers. What is the relationship between a city chapter or a Techstars operation and the global entity and other city operations? How do you orchestrate that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the magic of Techstars is that these programs really act together to create a network. The idea is that when you come into one accelerator, whether it's Tel Aviv or London or New York or even in Korea, you form a relationship with all of our corporate partners. So we work with partners like Amazon and Barclays and other partners. And what we actually do is we help you find your way into these corporates, into VCs, but also create a network of opportunities with over 10,000 mentors and investors and VCs, which I think is very relevant to what we're doing here today.
Yep.
Because we always look for great startups, right? That's what we do. So the idea is to actually match them with the right investors.
And the accelerator that you run in Tel Aviv, does that operate on a cohort model? And how many do you put through a year?
Yeah, so there's one cohort a year actually, and we carefully select 10 companies to go through that cohort. And the selection process is very long, but very efficient because most of our companies actually raise money while they're in program or in the first year. And the statistics are very encouraging. So I think the idea is to actually select the startups really well and get them into the network and create more opportunity.
So Israel is extraordinary by the numbers. As a country, you have the highest venture investment per capita of any country in the world, and it's not close. What do you think is special about the Israeli market that gives you that culture and startup entrepreneurship spirit that makes you so successful?
Wow, you shouldn't have asked me that question because I can go on forever about that. So I'll try to keep it short. I think the Israeli ecosystem, I'm completely in love with the Israeli ecosystem. I think it's not by chance that it has the biggest startups per capita also in the world, but also the investment per capita and such a large percentage of acquisitions are here in Israel, and every single big company has an R&D center here. And the idea is, I think, there's so many reasons and so much has been written about why it is. But I came to Israel when I was 18. I didn't grow up in Israel. My parents were Israeli, but I didn't grow up here. And when I came here, the first thing that struck me was that Israelis were very out of the box. You know, they didn't think in boxes. And I think to be a great entrepreneur, you need to be out of the box. And that's sometimes a double-edged sword too, because when you go out of Israel, sometimes people don't really understand a lot of things about you when you're Israeli. But I think this ecosystem is vibrant, and it's kicking, and it's growing even in today's world where everything else is showing decreasing graphs. I think the Israeli ecosystem is still growing, and I'm seeing a lot of investors still invest in Israel. So that I think what makes Israel so unique are just the people of Israel.
Nice. Can you talk a little bit about what Techstars does institutionally to drive diversity and inclusion and greater participation within the ecosystem?
Yes, and also it's a great point, because one of the reasons I love to be at Techstars is because I see so much is done, and so much effort is put into diversity and inclusion. And it's not just a word. I think we do a lot to promote female founders and to give them a great stage, but also people of color and any other minorities. And I think our MDs are instructed to do so, and we have some great initiatives, a great foundation for diversity and inclusion that invests in minorities. But also there is a lot of consciousness, I would say, about it. And I think that's where everything actually starts. And if you look at our staff, we have a lot of MDs, female MDs, and minorities and people of color, and everything else that really relates to actually being as inclusive as possible.
So what advice would you give, what actionable advice would you give to other accelerators or programs trying to build ecosystems in their country or their city to learn from the road that Techstars has gone down in this area?
Yeah, well, I only see Techstars uniqueness in front of me, so I don't know what other accelerators are doing, but the truth is that I can't see any other accelerator being as prominent, and I don't see them being as prominent outside of the US, simply because I think you need to hire the people that are local enthusiasts and that really love everything they do, and that know the ecosystem and want to bring the values. But at the end, a network is only as important as its core values. And I think the people that founded Techstars, which is Brad Feld and David Cohen, David Brown, and the people that I work with have a very specific DNA with a core value of what we call give first.
Yeah.
And when we give first, I think like great things happen. And so I think for Israel, it really worked, because the Israelis really love the idea that they can go into a network that actually becomes very international. When I was a young entrepreneur for a really long time, I raised a lot of money in my life. I made every mistake in the book, but I also had a lot of successes and raised over $40 million, and all the things I was doing, I was always looking for a network. I was always looking for people that could help me, and it's all about the people. And I think Techstars identified this some 12 years ago, and this is how they became what they are.
Fantastic. Can you talk a little bit about Yazamiyot and what led you to found it and the evolution of that organization over the last 11 years, I think it is?
Yes, I love to talk about Yazamiyot. Yazamiyot is a real baby, in that when we created it, we called it the very not international name Yazamiyot because we didn't think it was ever going to grow outside of Israel. It
Mhm.
was a small networking organization in my backyard, and we used to. We felt some of the CEOs, the female CEOs I knew, felt very lonely, and so they wanted to get together and just have a glass of wine and talk about common interests and success stories. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and we started doing some amazing international projects, one of which is called Google Campus for Moms, which started here in Israel, where moms on maternity leave actually come and study how to start their own startup, like a 10
Nice.
week session.
Mhm.
And it was so successful that Google duplicated it in about 12 or 13 places around the world. And we're lucky because it touched the lives of like literally thousands of women around the world that actually gone through this course. And then we did a beautiful project with Microsoft, a Microsoft Accelerator, and some projects. And we became the ambassadors of She Loves Tech, a very big organization for female founders. And so we started doing more and more international work, and we got bigger and bigger and realized there was a huge need for female founders to network with other female founders and to actually help each other raise money. And if we're speaking about VCs and raising money, you do know that the statistics is more or less 10% of the funding in the world goes to female CEOs
Yeah.
uh, in the startup world, and it's a terrible statistic, right? There's only in Israel more or less 7% of CEOs in the startup arena are female. So the idea was, why is it that we're in 2020 and it's still happening, and how can we change it? And the
Mhm.
idea was to not try to change it through, you know, glass ceiling episodes, etc., but actually try to change it from within, from our own network. Try to give confidence to other female founders, give them tips, give them a little bit of an unfair advantage in
Mhm.
other places where we can really help them and push them into raising money and give them more tips. And the reality that is it grew into such a successful organization and very energetic with great corporations around the world. And we had some great success stories of female founders actually meeting on Campus for Moms and actually exiting their company, right? So it does happen. Female founders do love to interact with each other, and this is why we started this organization.
So talk about the evolution, not just in growing membership, but how has the organization matured and how has it impacted the Israeli startup ecosystem? Have the numbers moved over the last 10 years? What's your look ahead to the next 10 years? What do you think is most effective in driving change around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel that numbers have changed a bit. We don't have formal numbers, but we
Mhm.
feel that the numbers are growing, and I'm very optimistic. I'm also feeling like from the VC world and also the angel investors, there's more and more intention to actually help female founders, and I feel there is a wind of change, and I'm feeling like we're in a revolution, and that's very nice. We also are in touch with a lot of government officials as far as legislation to promote more female founders, and of course we are talking to all the big giants
Mhm.
in order to promote entrepreneurship within the organization as well for female founders.
So what advice can you share from lessons you've learned in that trajectory? The female founder problem is everywhere. The US, the numbers are similar, and I think it's a global issue. So if I were in some other country trying to establish a similar network, what's the advice that you would give someone that was moved to do that? What can they take from your experience?
Well, I think you need to be very optimistic because there's a lot of objections that are very hard to. It's very hard to hear some of the of men, very respected men and women, by the way, with very conservative criticism to young CEOs who want to have a career and want you at home and want you this and want you that. And does your
Sure.
husband know that you're working that hard? And is he, does he approve of this, etc. But if we're looking at the actual numbers, it means we need to do both. We need to do top down, but we also need to do bottom up. And we need to give confidence to each other, and we need to have more role models, women that are successful and have a family and are still, I would say, normal, right?
Mhm.
And I
Great.
think a lot of female young women still worry that if they go and they do a startup or entrepreneurship course, they're not going to be good enough moms or anything. I think that worry still exists, and we need to bring in more and more role models forward to show that the life can change, especially in today's age, by the way, where everybody is unfortunately working at home and
Yeah.
doesn't really make a difference. But the problem is that a lot of women sometimes leave the game at a really early stage when they want to have young kids, and when they come back, sometimes not because anyone is trying to enhance it, they lost many years in the process, and
Mhm.
they should be very careful to get back in the game.
Are there specific programs? It's one of the segments that I think is uh, underutilized of returning workers and ways to help people return to the workforce. Are there things that you do specifically in that area, or um, talk about that a little more?
Yes, so we have many courses. We just finished one very successful one with the University of Tel Aviv. We did about 10 municipalities in Israel where we actually encourage women to come back and go through a small semi-academic course, uh,
Mhm.
but also very practical and hands-on, where we show them a lot of role models, very practical, very charismatic women who still are able to live a full life and have a career. And sometimes that really helps. I mean, we get very good feedback from women who say that really pushed them over and eliminated some of their fears.
Great. Can you talk about if for the founders in the audience, the entrepreneurs in the audience, how can they make the best use of Techstars? What should they do in thinking about how they can help their startups and take advantage of the global infrastructure Techstars provides?
Wow, yes. Well, we have accelerators. We also have a lot of different vehicles, and we have Startup Weekend, which are big communities in about 120 places in the world where they can just join startup weekends and meet entrepreneurs, investors, and mentors. But if they want to apply, there are excellent programs all run by people that have been entrepreneurs that really understand the drill, that become your co-founder. And so I would recommend to go into the Techstars website. The Tel Aviv application, by the way, is open for
Okay.
2021.
And
So
is that a global application in this
it's global.
virtual era? So,
It's absolutely global. So we had Italian companies here. We had a company from Montenegro.
okay,
We have South American. So if you want to spend time in the most, I think, exciting ecosystem in the world, and it's you can apply to this program and become one of the 10 companies that actually apply to Techstars Tel Aviv. But if not, there are amazing programs in Abu Dhabi, in the whole of the US, Canada, India. There's so many places. So just go
mhm,
into your preferred place and your preferred vehicle, because we have different verticals. So if you're in smart mobility, it's time for you to apply to Torino, etc.
great, great. Can you talk a little bit about what advice you have for investors that are looking to drive greater inclusion in the ecosystem? So if you put on your investment hat, what are the things that investors that want to move in this direction can do that are most impactful?
I do this all the time. I also invest in companies, and I know it's not an easy task because you want to invest in the best companies and you want to bring the best return, but you should also look as a whole and what you want to do as a business and where you want to invest. So I think that if you're looking to invest in female founders, you need to understand that research has shown that there are better managers over time. They are more loyal to the organization. The fact that they're very emotional is not actually a disadvantage. It's sometimes an advantage. Most of the time, it's an advantage, and they look after companies. I think in the best possible way, and they're also very straightforward. And they're great. They have great people skills. Of course, I'm generalizing, and it's not
Sure.
everyone, but research has shown, the numbers are showing that this is a great business decision to invest in women. So the idea is to find the right, maybe even organizations, and get a better deal flow, because sometimes it's difficult when you have a pipeline that has only 2 or 3 female founders out of 10. It's very difficult to invest in female founders. So the idea is to actually open up your pipeline.
And what have you seen that's effective in sending the signal to the marketplace that your pipeline is welcoming to those applications, right? Because part of it is if you do the same things, you get the same deal flow, right? So what do you do differently?
I think there's like I said, you can tap into organizations and networking and events and conferences. And of course, if you have more female investors in your VC, research has shown that we invest in people that are like us. And so if there's more female investors, most likely there'll be more female CEOs and even founders. And I think there's so much you can do in feminism. The spectrum is very high. It starts from primary school to high school, to encouraging them to go into tech, to encouraging them to do mathematics in primary school. So there's so much you can do. But if you're looking only at our market, our investor, I think it's time to open your pipeline and just get more and more of those.
Fantastic. So any last words for conference attendees on diversity, inclusion, or anything else you think they should?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're lucky to be at this conference. It's an amazing conference, so thank you very much. And to everybody watching, I think we're in the middle of a revolution, like I said, and we are able to make a change. And I think Israel is one of the places that is, I hope will make the change first, because there is a lot of intention around, a lot of investors that are actually looking to invest in women. So as far as diversity and inclusion, I think it's very important that we hold this topic and we don't ignore it, and we don't, because I think in previous years, like 3-4 decades ago, people just said it doesn't happen. And even when I started as an entrepreneur, people said, well, why do you think it's because you're a woman? But when I raised money, I had, I was 9 months pregnant. And it's a very difficult thing to raise money when you're not pregnant, right? So the idea is to overlook that and look at the CEO, and to all your investors watching and all your founders, it's time to make that shift.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.